I would like to keep this message for this morning fairly simple, because we're talking this morning about God who is our hope. God is our hope. And I have recognized that there is a serious shortcoming in my thinking and my living that relates to the fact that God is my hope. And really, we don't need to complicate this issue too much. Really, the problem is simple, and the solution, while it has many sort of applications and implications, the solution boils down to a single confidence, a single principle, a single idea. Cling to the living, risen Christ who speaks your name before the God of the universe. The solution, I'm going to spoil the end of the sermon for you right now. The solution is we have a living hope. It is the resurrected Jesus who has gone into the very presence of the Father and speaks your name before the Father. He is your advocate. He is the one who stands in the presence of God as our high priest. That is the solution. But let's take a look at this idea of hope, and we'll recognize, I think, very quickly the problem many of us have. So let me read for you Hebrews chapter 6, beginning in verse 13 and ending at the end of the chapter in verse 20. Hear the word of the Lord in the book of Hebrews 6, 13 to 20. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. And so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Men swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered to us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. This is the word of the Lord, and we thank God for his word. There are only 2 points in my message this morning, and you'll notice that those of you who have sermon handouts, I'm making you do a little bit of extra work, because you don't just get to fill in the blanks today, you have to write the whole thing out. So I'm sorry to make you do that extra work, but hopefully it pays benefits in that you're getting extra learning done as well. At the very least, your penmanship will improve just a little bit through practice this morning. 2 ideas that I want us to focus on. One simple concept. Here is the concept. Our hope is the natural result of our faith in God. Our hope is the natural result of our faith in God, his character and his promises. This week at camp, one of our staff devotions focused on the fact that God is trustworthy. When he speaks, he does what he promises. When he speaks, you can trust what he says. It is true. Our hope is the natural result of our faith in God, his character and his promises. God came to Abraham and made promises to him. And he says, because I am who I am, you can trust me. And of course, we receive the verse in Genesis that is repeated by the New Testament authors, that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. God was taken at his word by Abraham, and Abraham was found faithful. If our hope is weak, listen to what I say very carefully now. If our hope is weak, if we are pessimistic, if we are cynical, maybe you call it realism. If our hope is weak, it is a symptom of a weak faith and a lack of confidence in God's trustworthiness. That is a simple fact. So let me define some of those terms for you, because I think we throw them around without really thinking about them. What is pessimism? Pessimism, defined by the dictionary, is a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe the worst will happen. Pessimism is a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen. Pessimism demonstrates a lack of faith in our God, who promises that for those who love him and are called according to his purposes, he is working all things out for good. That's a promise of God. Paul wrote that to us in Romans. Pessimism instead has the tendency to see the worst, not the fact that God is working out the good. How about cynicism? Cynicism is an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. Are you a cynical person? Do you always think not just the worst of situations, but of people? And it's true, people are often motivated by self-interest. But do you know who has a plan and a purpose that is bigger than the self-interests of kings and rulers, of administrators, those in power and authority? You know whose plans are bigger? You know whose power is greater? You know whose power will not be, whose purposes will not be denied? It is our God. Cynicism demonstrates weak faith. And the reason I find this so challenging is because I ask myself the same question that we read in the psalm that got our service started. Psalm 42, why are you downcast, O my soul? Have you forgotten who God is and how he works? We can look over and over through the Old Testament and see that God is making promises to his people, and he's reminding his people that he can be trusted, and he's demonstrating to his people that he can be trusted over and over and over again. And over and over and over again, we see that those who put their trust in the Lord, those who wait patiently for the Lord, those whose confidence is the Lord, they are never put to shame. And we begin to read in Hebrews that when God makes his promises, he swears by himself, this unchangeable God. When we read that, it should convict us for our hopelessness, our pessimism, and our cynicism. I want to read to you something that Amy Carmichael wrote. Just a few lines of verse, but it should be an encouragement to you. Strength of my heart, I need not fail, not mine to fear, but to obey. With such a leader, who could quail? Thou art as thou wert yesterday. Strength of my heart, I rest in thee. Fulfill thy purposes through me. You see, our hope is the natural result of our faith in God, his character and his promises. That was point number one. Point number two, let's cut right to the heart of it. What is the solution for hopelessness? What is the solution for our cynicism and our pessimism, for our quote-unquote realism as Christians in the world today? Well, it says right here. Let me read for you from verse 16 to 20. Men swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered to us may be greatly encouraged. What is that hope we have? Verse 19. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. So we're talking about our hope. What is the hope? What is the anchor? What do we cling to? It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And from this point, this is sort of a launching point for the author of the Hebrews. He goes in now into chapter 7, talking about Melchizedek the priest, the one who ministered to Abraham, the receiver of the promise. when we need an anchor to hold us in the storm. When we need an anchor to hold us in the storm that threatens our hope, we cling to the risen Christ who speaks our name in the very presence of God. When the storm is threatening your hope, you need to cling to the anchor, the risen Christ who speaks your name in the very presence of God. When I went to Emmanuel Bible College in Kitchener, the very first sermon I heard in chapel was given by the interim president of the chapel, and it was a picture from the Old Testament that God has the names of his people engraved in the palms of his hands, or on his hands. Chiseled in his hands were the names of those who belong to him. He knows your name. And the picture that's being brought here in the book of Hebrews is of Jesus, the living Christ, who serves us in the very presence of God, right? That Old Testament picture of the temple and the tabernacle, that tabernacle that was built with human hands, is a symbol or an image of the heavenly tabernacle, the immortal, imperishable tabernacle. And there's a curtain that divides the holiest place of all from where the priests minister. And the priest can only go in on those rare occasions where it is appropriate and the purifications have been offered. So the priest goes and stands in the very presence of God, where the mercy seat rests. The Ark of the Covenant symbolizing that presence of God with his people. Only on a rare occasion could the high priest in Israel do it. But now there is living a high priest who stands in the presence of God, and he knows your name. So when we need an anchor to hold us in the storm that threatens our hope, cling to the risen Christ who enters into the most holy place of all. We talk so much, and rightfully so, about the death of Jesus. But do we remember the resurrection of Christ and the power it has to bring us hope here and now? I'm going to read to you from chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians. Listen to the power of the risen Christ to bring hope to you and to me. 1 Corinthians 15 begins like this. Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you were saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you, as of first importance. That Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised again on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 other brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Do you hear what Paul is saying? There are people during Paul's day who could speak first-hand testimony to the fact that Jesus is not dead, he is alive. Then he appeared to James, then to the other apostles. Last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. For I am the least of the apostles, and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and in his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was within me. Whether then it was I or they, this is what we preached, and this is what you believed. Of first importance to Paul was the fact that Jesus died, but that he rose again. And that he showed himself alive, victorious. Paul will then go on to talk about the resurrection of the dead. He says, but if it's preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? If there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. All of our faith, its power, hangs on the resurrection of Jesus. If you want to meditate on the power of the resurrection, if you want to meditate on its importance, I urge you to continue to read chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, but let's focus back in on the simple truth that when we need an anchor to hold us in the storm that threatens our hope, we need to cling to Christ, who speaks our name in the very presence of God. So let me conclude with this challenge to you. What is it that threatens your hope today? What situation, what circumstance, what trial, what difficulty, what individual, what challenge threatens your hope? Cling to Christ. He knows your name. Cling to the promises of God. Paul tells us all the promises God makes, they find their yes in Jesus. So what promise do you need to hear from His Word today? I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. How about, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. How about the promise that the treasures of this world fade, but those who invest their treasures in heaven, they have an inheritance that will never perish, spoil, or fade, and it's waiting for us when Jesus returns. Just before we go to prayer, I want to read for you a quote by C.H. Spurgeon. Spurgeon said, "My hope lives not because I am not a sinner, but because I am a sinner for whom Christ died. My trust is not that I am holy, but that being unholy, He is my righteousness. My faith rests not upon what I am or shall be or feel or know, but in what Christ is, in what Christ has done, and what Christ He is now doing for me." Spurgeon ended that statement with a hallelujah.